by the Ecuadorian people. And when the pandemic struck, the Chinese government just said, hey, you don't have to debt service, you don't have to pay service on the debt. We're just going to postpone it indefinitely. This is one of the most generous terms I've seen from international finance
China.
In the middle of this pandemic.
Show them how to
By
do
the
it.
way, most private capital in Europe has refused to renegotiate the terms of 11 trillion of debt. Many developing countries ended up paying $4 trillion last year in debt servicing payments, combined, all of them, last year. But the Chinese said you don't have to pay. So this accusation, debt trap diplomacy is not there. The Chinese have two different theories of investment. Three different theories, sorry, I forgot the most important. One is called patient capital, where you'll lend money to build a port, say in El Salvador, and you don't expect the rate of return to come immediately. It'll come at some point, but you're lending money to build a port there. That's important to you. So that's patient capital. You're not hurrying to recoup the investment. Second is a political
Patient
capital. You're
Political
investing in a
capital.
country that has close political ties to you.
Oh, it's
You know,
amazing to hear
perhaps
somebody actually
it's
talk
when
about
China
China.
says, okay, we'll invest something in Cuba. We have a political relationship
China is
with the
amazing.
Cubans. We'll invest. We don't care about the investment cost. We'll eat that. That's political
Nice.
capital. But the third is interesting, and that's the Belt and Road kind of approach. We'll build a port so that we can then bring our goods into the country. They have a commercial reason for that. Well, but they are not saying only Chinese goods can come in. Other goods can come in. It's not like an Indian ship can't dock in that port, but it also facilitates the BRI. So these are their approaches to this kind of infrastructural development.
Patient capital,
They've
political
openly
capital,
said
and
that we
BRI.
are not interested in only
Belt and
investing
Road
in countries
Initiative.
and telling them to become pro-China. Yes, there is actually one political stipulation.
They'll
Many
end
of
up
these
pro-China.
countries have to, if they're going to take capital from China, have to no longer recognize Taiwan in the United Nations and have to recognize China. That's a political
boo-hoo.
stipulation, but that's also for legal paperwork. How can I, as the Chinese government, sign a deal with you if you don't recognize me? So that happens a lot, but they're not saying we'll only give money to a left government.
It doesn't really
After all,
hurt
they're
anybody to
investing
not
in Brazil.
recognize
There's a
Taiwan.
government there led by Jair Bolsonaro, whose son says racist things on Twitter about China all the time.
Bolsonaro is
and yet
terrible
China
racist,
continues
too.
to have a relationship with them. There's no political
Well, you should
litmus
use
test.
that influence
That being
in
said,
places like that.
the idea of
Like we should use it in Israel. Cut it off to Israel if they keep genocide and they keep terrorizing.
Of an immediate rate of return. Pakistan, for instance, there's no expectation of an immediate rate of return. The Pakistani government cannot pay China back at all, because they have a political linkage, which is going to endure.
Well, Washington and its minions in the media have been hyping China as a danger, citing threats to Taiwan. China's building military bases on islands in the South China Sea.
Building islands is just
hypocrisy here is
making
kind of
islands themselves. It's
stunning.
kind of
The
awesome.
Chinese military has one aircraft carrier. The U.S. has 11. U.S. military expenditure is, of course, number one in the world and way exceeds China. The U.S. bases surround China. There's a new development called the Quad Group. Do you see that as being directed toward China? That's a group involving Australia, Japan, the United States, and India.
Tricontinental will release a report on militarization of the African continent. It's an interesting report because, again, if you travel in Africa, people will say, well, Chinese,
This guy's
the Chinese
fascinating. I wish I knew who he
colonialism
was.
and so on. China has two military bases in Africa. It's true. One is in Djibouti, one is in Somalia. They are both port bases. Why does China have a military base in Africa? What's the game? About 10 years ago, the United Nations passed a resolution against piracy. And they called for an international mission against piracy in the Horn of Africa region, the Gulf of Aden, the shipping lanes for oil and so on. Now, there's something tragic in this story because this story is about the destruction of Somali fishing as a consequence of big fish trawlers that come from multinational corporations. These trawlers have been eating into the coastline.
Oh, and that's
of
why
East
people turn to
Africa and the
piracy,
Horn
is
of
because
Africa.
you've
So many
destroyed
of
all their
the
local
old
fishing.
Somali fisher people became pirates. That's the story of what happened. You remember the whole thing about the Somali pirates. It became suddenly a big flashpoint. So the UN created an anti-piracy force. China participated, and for that reason has these bases in Djibouti and in Somalia. They are to support the UN piracy mission. Meanwhile, in the 55 countries on the African continent, in over 20 countries, the United States has military bases. In the country of Niger, in the town of Agadez, the US has one of the world's largest drone bases, which when you see it, David, it is stunning. I want to tell you a little bit about Agadez, just to give you a
Wish I
sense
could
of
record more of
what
this. I've
we're
only got
talking
30
about
seconds
here.
left.
The African continent is geographically just a remarkable,
KUGN
stunning
88.5.
place.
Look it
At
up.
the very top, on the rim of North Africa, there's the coastline with the Mediterranean, but just below the coastline, in some countries, less than half an hour drive away from the coast, you hit the beginning of the Sahara
KUGN
Desert.
88.5.